All right. So we're going to be talking about asymmetric cryptography today. Last week was symmetric cryptography. We talked about encryption and maps. Now we're talking about asymmetric. So getting into a quick recap of what asymmetric means, why we find it useful. In symmetric cryptography, we have the same key for both operations. So if I wanted to encrypt something, I would use a key K. If I want to decrypt something, I'd use that same key. That's why it's symmetric. It's the same on both sides. It's the same with maps. We would use one key to generate a map, and then to verify, you actually generate the map again, so you need to use the same key. On the other hand, asymmetric cryptography means that we have two keys, and at a high level, what you do with one key, you can undo it with the other. So for encryption, we would say I have one key, and this key's only purpose is to encrypt things. And then I have another key that only I know that is used to decrypt. So I could give all of you my public key. You could encrypt a message to me, and only I can decrypt that message, even if everyone else sees it. You can't even use the public key to decrypt the message, only to encrypt. And the same thing goes with signatures. I could use my private key to sign a message. And since all of you have my public key, then you can use it to verify that signature. But you can't generate a signature with the public key. So you can kind of see how this starts to be useful, because now we don't have to deal with, how do we share a secret key? What happens if you lose a secret key? I can just give you a public key and we're already done. So some schemes that we'll see are LVML, we'll see Diffie-Hellman key exchange, we'll talk briefly about RSA, and then there's one that's not covered this semester, which is called DSA. Questions on the broad overview before we get into it? Yeah, for encryption schemes, we usually say we use the public key to encrypt. I guess you could say that only one person can encrypt the message and anyone can decrypt it, but generally that's not really a useful scheme for us. All right, so the first public key scheme we talked about is Diffie-Hellman, and maybe we didn't talk about it in an actual public key context, but looking closely at this, you can actually kind of see that it is in fact a public key scheme. So I know the diagram is over here. I'm also going to draw it up here so I can. Okay. I'm also going to draw it up here so I can explain it as I go. So in this diagram, we have Alice and we have Bob. They want to communicate in order to share a key with each other, but they don't currently share a key with each other. And what this scheme is going to let us do is allow Alice and Bob to share a key over this insecure channel, even if Eve is listening. So what we have is Alice generates some secret number A, and Bob generates some secret number B. There's going to be, in this public space, which is why I'm going to intersect, some large prime number B, and some generator. You don't need to worry about what the generator is. It's just, you can think of it as a number between 2 and P minus 1. Just some number among P. These are out in the open, so Eve does know these. They're just part of the protocol. You can't just have Alice send her public component over. If she just sent A, then now A is out in the open and Eve has not learned it. Now there's no secret information. So now what Alice is going to do instead is she's going to take A, exponentiate it, so take G. And all of this is done mod P. So if you fix the assembly, you're sort of familiar with doing everything mod P. It's going to take this G to the A and send it over to Bob. So now Eve knows G to the A, but Eve doesn't know the value of A. And that's because of the discrete log problem. She can't go backwards from G to the A back to A. Bob is going to do the same thing. Now, again, he can't just send B over, but he's going to compute G to the B and send this. So now we can see, in this public space, Eve knows P, G, G to the B, and G to the A, but she still doesn't know A and B. And the final step of this protocol is that Alice is going to take this G to the B and raise it to the power of A. So remember, by our formula of exponents, if we have G to the B and we raise it to the power of A, this is the same as G to the A B. Right? And Eve can't compute this because she doesn't have A and she doesn't have B. Bob can also compute this. So Bob has g to the a now. If Bob takes g to the a, raises it to the power of b, this is going to result also in g to the ab. And notice that these two numbers are the same. Got one more. Notice that these two numbers. All right, let's look at one. Notice that these two numbers. No, we're not. Oh my gosh, you're actually saving my life. Thank you. Yeah. I'm just going to talk to the set of front desk saying, hey. All right. No, I haven't. Oh, that's enough. All right, all right. Sorry. Notice how these two numbers are the same. So now Alice and Bob share this number, even though Eve can't compute it. So that's kind of a cool thing here. Alice and Bob didn't share anything before, but now they share the secret that Eve can't compute. And that's the entire basis of the Diffie-Hellman problem. It's that, or of Diffie-Hellman, it's that Alice and Bob can arrive at this shared secret, but Eve can't. So now they can use this as some key to say like, oh, this is my key now, and I'll start encrypting things, I'll start mapping things, and so on and so forth. We usually call this a public key, an asymmetric scheme. It's not an encryption scheme, it's just a scheme. Is that we've got private components. So this B here is private. This A here is private. So everything else here is public. If only someone with a private component can actually derive the shared secret. And because Eve doesn't have any of the private components, she can't derive it. So that's why we call this an asymmetric scheme. Question with how this works? Okay, cool. And if you're online, I know Ron's not here today, so feel free to raise your hand. I do have the participants window open, and I'll call on you when you do. All right, so that should be enough. To get into the public key encryption scheme, or to get into the discussion sheet. So this question is sort of giving a high-level overview of, again, just asking questions about Diffie-Hellman. And then it's going to talk about something called forward secrecy, which we touched on in the lecture, but we're going to ask you to reason about a bit more over here. So why don't we spend like 5 minutes should be enough for this question, and then we can talk about the answer. Really quickly, can I check that people online can hear me? I think I just switched the mic, but I'm not sure. Okay. I have no idea, but it does say it's working, so I'm going to assume it's working. Does anyone here not like loud noises? It's also in a corner, so it's not hard. Also, I have no idea if it was clear at all, but this question does span 2 pages. There's just a really large gap in between them, and I don't know why. All right, who's not finished yet? Who is finished? Okay. That approximately sums to 4. Why don't we get into it? So this first question is pretty conceptual. Which values of A, B, G, and P are public? And which ones are private? Now I just said it, so let's say it back to me.
A and B are private.
Yes, A and B are private, and P and G are public. They're defined as part of this. All right. Let's say that Alice and Bob think they're doing this exchange, and so they arrive at their G to the A and G to B. And then suddenly, what is it? Bob calls Alice, and he's like, "My key is this," and it's like, "Oh, I got like key K." Alice is like, "Oh no, wait, I got key K prime, but we're supposed to have the same number. What happened here?" And let's say that it's not Eve, it's actually someone else.
Could Mallory have changed the value of G?
Could Mallory have changed the value of G? So the value of G is defined as part of like the standard. So everyone like implicitly knows it. So they can't change G, but if Mallory's the man in the middle down here, we'll draw out this again. What can Mallory do when Alice sends G to A? If she can tamper, if she can like sort of interfere with this connection.
Could she add her own exponent and we just change the A?
Sorry, say that one again?
Can she add her own exponent so G to the power of A times B?
Huh, okay, so you're saying, Bob receives G to the AC. So like, Mallory sort of exponentiated it with her own thing. That could work. Well, let me think about it. Then you'd still end up with G to the A, B, C here. And Mallory still doesn't have A or B, so she still can't derive that. But if Mallory can replace what's being sent here, what's something that she could send to Bob that's like, that she has full access to? Maybe not G to the AC, but what if she just replaced it with her own G to the C? So Mallory like just says, I'm gonna cut off this connection. That's not happening. I'm gonna send you G to the C. And Bob just receives this number. He has no idea where it came from because this is an untrusted channel. So what Bob is gonna compute now is, he's still got his B. He's gonna compute G to the BC. And then Bob likewise tries to send G to the B. Again, gets cut off. Alice also receives G to the C. Or it could even be G to the D, doesn't really matter. Mallory knows C and D. So Mallory, a little thought bubble here, she knows C and she knows D. Alice, she receives this. It's not used D. Alice receives G to the C. She is going to, again, not know that it came from Mallory and not Bob, but she computes G to the AC. And now look what's happened. Mallory knows C. She knows G to the A and G to the B. She can derive G to the AC with her knowledge, and she can derive G to the A, or no, G to the BC with her knowledge. So now when Alice sends something, she sends hello world to Bob, encrypted under G to the AC. Mallory says, okay, that's a nice message you got there. Open it, read it, all right. Now I'll encrypt it under G to the BC and send that over to Bob. And Alice and Bob have no idea this is happening because all they see is, I sent something, I received something, I derived a key, and all the messages being sent are encrypted with that key. So there's nothing indicating to either of them that something has gone wrong. But if Bob went and, sorry about that. If Bob went and compared these keys against each other, like say Bob called, they say, huh, that's weird. I got key K, but you got key prime. So this is how a man in the middle can interfere with the big element. Does that make sense? Any questions? All right. Moving on to a concept called forward secrecy. So there's a Diffie-Hellman here as before. That hasn't really changed. We've also introduced a different key exchange scheme that says Bob has some secret key that we all know. Everyone knows Bob's public key, so it's in this public space here. And Alice is thus going to just generate her key, encrypt it with Bob's public key, and send it to Bob. Pretty straightforward. Now, if we're saying at some point Eve is like, I'm going to break into your computer, or you have to correct.
So small question. So isn't it when Alice is sending the key, signing this? So basically, she's sending her public key, signing with the public key as well, or?
Okay. So remember that the notation for signing would be -1. The notation for encrypting is +1, aka it's just a key. So whenever we sign with a key, we always use like we always use like some secret key, and it's to the -1.
Okay, so here it's not signing.
Yeah, here it's encryption.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of just a notation thing that we use in this class and in literature in general.
Okay, so basically, Alice is encrypting her private key.
Mhm.
So her private key.
Well, Alice is just because they want to get to some shared key, right?
Yeah.
So Alice is just generating some random key, encrypting it, sending it to Bob, and Bob is decrypting it.
Yeah.
So, we get the same thing here. Alice and Bob share a key. So what we're trying to reason about is, let's say Eve now goes and breaks into Bob's computer. Now she knows what SKB is. If Eve has all of this information. Let's say like she recorded all this information, so she says that, she says this. How could she go back later and decrypt Bob's messages? Let's say they said like, I, Bob, encrypted under K, and she saves this as well. How could she decrypt this message if she breaks into Bob's computer and steals his long-term secret key?
She could decrypt the first message, right?
Right. Now that she has a secret key, she can decrypt the message that Alice sent, reveal K, and then use this K to decrypt the message, assuming Eve recorded all of these messages. Now, let's take a look at this. So in this key, neither Alice nor Bob have any sort of like long-term secret key that everyone just implicitly knows, right? They're sort of doing this from scratch. So after they're done with this communication, what's going to happen is that Bob's going to say, okay, I'm done with this communication. I don't need B. I don't need G to the AB anymore because we're no longer using this key whatsoever. Bob's going to delete that. Bob's going to delete that. Which is also that. And so on and so forth. Now, let's say, again, he recorded that, recorded this. She also recorded like I encrypted under K, which is G to the AB, and she recorded this as well. If Eve now breaks into Bob's computer, what is she able to do? Can she decrypt this message? I'm seeing shaking heads here.
I don't think so.
Yeah. If you take a look at this, actually, Eve hasn't learned anything that she didn't already know. Because Bob deleted this off of his computer, Bob deleted these off of his computer, and G to the B was already public. So by breaking into Bob's computer, Eve hasn't actually learned any extra information. So she still can't decrypt this message. It's still as hard as it was previously. So that's kind of the difference with these two schemes here. If Eve records everything here, and then breaks into Bob's computer and steals his secret key, then Eve can decrypt the message. But here, they're just doing this for like one use. It's called an ephemeral. It's called ephemerality. If Eve breaks into Bob's computer before, after he deletes all of this message is still secure. And that's a property we call for secrecy. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. I know one question sometimes that I get is like, why doesn't Bob just delete his secret key? Because we're saying, oh, Alice just knows Bob's secret key or knows Bob's public key. We're saying like this is somehow attached to his identity. So maybe, some people have a card that actually has a secret key on it, and that key identifies them. They can't just delete that key, or they've just deleted the key that identifies who they are. So if Bob deleted this key, then yes, there's nothing that you can do to get back to this. But usually when we say Bob has a long-term secret key, we say that Bob's not going to delete it. Versus here, they can do this for every exchange. All right, so going back into public key encryption. I need two things at once here with this recording. So, we talked about El-Gamal as our main encryption scheme. I'll go through it really quickly. Is everyone good if I erase this board? Okay. See. Okay. So in El-Gamal, we're actually going to do something very similar to what we did in Diffie-Hellman. So we actually have, again, a large prime number G, or a large prime number P, and a generator G. We're also going, and we need to define what our key generation algorithm is. So Remember, in asymmetric encryption, we have a secret key and a public key. So we're just going to generate some random number X and say that is our secret key. Pretty straightforward. Now, remember that in Diffie-Hellman, what we did to make the public component that we can send is raise that number to the power of G, or raise G to the power of that number. We're just going to do the same thing here. We're going to say our public key is in fact just G to the X. In Algebra, sometimes we also call it H. So that's what I'll use here. That's pretty straightforward. You can kind of look at it and see, oh, someone just did 1/2 of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Question?
But it's always mod P, right?
Yes, this is all mod P. With mod P space here. It just gets tedious to write out every time. But yes, all of this is implicitly mod P. To encrypt something, we're going to take, so say we have our message M. And this takes an H. What we're going to do is, well, if we're encrypting something with the public key, we still have to do the other half of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So we're going to generate some random number Y. And we're going to take that number and raise G to the power of Y as well. So we need to somehow use these numbers to encrypt the message. Well, we know that we have this H. So if we did H to the power of Y, that would be G to the power of XY, which is, again, the secret thing that only someone with either Y or X can derive. And we know that this kind of looks random. So actually, if we take our message and multiply it by this number, multiplying something by some random number also makes that result look random. So this here is going to be the first part of our ciphertext. And we know that for Bob to decrypt, he also needs G to the Y. So we're going to say our ciphertext is composed of two values here, C1, C2. C1 is just going to be, if I remember correctly, okay, C1 is going to be M times H to the Y, which is M times G to the XY. And C2 is going to be that G to the Y that we computed. All right. And finally, to decrypt, we need to take in the secret value X as well as C1 and C2. What we want to do is we want to derive this G to the XY again, and we can kind of invert that and recover the original value of M. So let's walk through this step by step. We're going to say we want to take this C1, which again is really M times H to the XY, so I'm just going to write that out. And we want to multiply this by C2, which again is just this G to the Y. And we want to recover G to the XY. So we're going to take our private X and raise this to the power of that. But we want to undo whatever this did. What we're actually going to do is, you could do this in two steps. You could take this to the power of -1. You could also see that this is just equal to raising something to the power of -x. So we're just going to write that out for notation, or notation's sake. And if we solve this for a while, we know that H to the Y is actually just G to the XY. We know that G to the Y to the -x is really just G to the -xy. These two, if you multiply G to the something times G to the minus something, this just goes to 1, goes to 0. And that means that we recover our original value of that. So this encryption scheme is really just do half of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, have someone else do their half of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, multiply their message by the whatever secret key came out, and then send everything to, or the ciphertext is everything that the recipient needs to do the same thing and undo the G to the XY. Questions on this? Yes.
But in practice, algebra is not really used to send messages, like the long message.
Yes. So we're not going to talk about that today, just because it's not part of the discussion sheet, but I think it is part of the discussion sheet. But you're right, that all of this number theory is really slow. CPUs are a lot faster at XORing than they are like taking something to the power of something mod something. So in practice, what you do is you generate some symmetric key K, encrypt the symmetric key K with the public key, and then send the message encrypted using the symmetric key. And this is fast, and you still can't recover this key K without the secret key of it. That's what we call hybrid encryption. You will see it briefly on the discussion sheet, but only as a true false question. So you might already know what it is. Of note, this is not quite in CPA on its own. The easiest reason to see why is because if M is 0, you can very clearly tell that this part will be 0, and the adversary can use that as a distinguishing mechanism. So you do need a bit more on top of this in order to make it secure, but it's good enough for purposes of this class. I actually won't talk about RSA right now. Or maybe I will, and I just forgot to put a discussion sheet question on that. Okay. So why don't you spend another 5 minutes on the public key question? It's not long, and we can talk about it afterwards. Actually, let me kind of take a survey because we're not going to finish with these questions. Would people rather review the Elgamal encryption question or the RSA signatures question?
What's the most useful?
Hmm?
What's the most useful?
I think RSA signatures are more interesting personally. And I think the thing about RSA is also used for encryption, so I think it is cooler. But they're both relevant to the course material and like the final exam. So yeah. Why don't we just stick with the Elgamal question then? And then if we have a little bit of time afterwards, I can rush through how RSA works before we end for the day.
2.1,
Yes.
don't they already know G since it's public? What is it asking? Oh,
Yes, that's correct. This one more time. All right, why don't we get into it then? I guess you brought it up, but is it a problem if the adversary learns the value of G here? No, no, it is not. G is a public value, just like in Diffie-Hellman. It's defined as part of the standard. So it's similar. If LGML is ever implemented in practice, I could literally look it up in some web page somewhere and see, oh, G is actually 6,557 or something. I don't know. All right. With LGML, it is not a problem if R is actually, so R is actually Y. We are really inconsistent with our letters. So let's say it's not a problem if Y is accidentally revealed after encryption is done. True or false? Let's say the adversary learns the value of Y that we used in this ciphertext. What could the adversary recover the original message?
It's not false, right?
Huh?
Why should stay secret? So
Yeah, Y should stay secret. So if Y is revealed, how could the adversary recover the original message? Knowing that they also have access to H, because the public key. Y, and we have G to the X, which is H. Is there a way for us to, I guess, cancel out this G to the XY?
he can basically compute J to the X to the minus
Yeah.
Y.
So if the adversary computes G to the X to the minus Y, this is G to the minus XY. If they multiply that with this message here, so n times G to the XY, this all again cancels out to 1. And so now we've recovered the original value of that. So just like how Bob needs to make sure that his secret key X never gets leaked, same with Diffie-Hellman. We need to make sure that Y doesn't get leaked. Otherwise, again, the adversary can recover the original message. All right, now we're going to talk about the adversary didn't recover the message, but they are somehow tampering with this message. So in this scheme, Alice says, hey, how many dollars do I owe you? Bob sends back the number 10,000. Or at least we think Bob sends back the number 10,000. In actuality, what Alice sent was 100 times G to the XY as this first second block here. This is all sort of enclosed. So Mallory doesn't actually know what the value is. But what could Mallory do if she wanted to change the value to 10,000? How could you change this into something that looks like Alice encrypted 10,000 or Bob encrypted 10,000?
The execution will just
Yeah, by 100, 10,000, yeah. So if we think about, okay, this is the message that Alice sent. What we want Bob to think is that Alice sent this times G to the XY. Now, the question becomes, can we go from here to here without any secret component? And yes, it is actually really easy. We just multiply this by 10. That's equal to 10,000 times g to the x minus y, or times g to the xy. So when Alice receives this, she decrypts this and sees, oh, the number that was sent was 100, that was 10,000. And if Bob actually sent like 50, then Alice would get back 5,000. So this is what we call a malleable scheme. Mallory is able to manipulate the method in a predictable way, basically.
So did she multiply the entire thing? Or-
Yeah, so this whole
Like a
blob is
component?
sort of one
Okay,
number,
got it.
but she can still multiply a blob times 10
Okay.
and get 10,000, which is its own blob. But yeah. And anyone think of another way that she could have done this? Maybe even an easier way. Say Mallory in the middle, Bob sends 10 times g to the xy, 100 times g to the xy. What can Mallory do? Other than this, what is a really easy way for Mallory to make it look like Bob sent a different message? All right.
I'm not following.
Huh?
So I'm not following.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is, you know what, Bob, I don't care about your message. I'm just going to make it look like this message is actually 10,000 times g to the x, and then Mallory would choose her own value of like z or something. So again, Alice doesn't know anything about what like this g to the xy should look like. It's just something multiplied by something, which is a blob. And Alice knows that Bob is going to choose some random value of y. So when Mallory chooses a different random value of y, aka z, Alice doesn't actually know that. She just receives this and also g to the z. And when she decrypts this, again, she'll see 10,000. So basically what Mallory did is ignore Bob's message. Mallory just encrypted the value of 10,000 herself and sent it along.
So like the first example, we did.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, it's like diffing up. You just cancel this message and send it out. The question, what could Bob have additionally sent that would have stopped this attack? Just a macro signature. That's assuming they share a key, but if they don't share a key, then that's really impossible. As in like theoretically impossible. All right, in the 5 minutes that we have, I don't think we're going to be able to get to the discussion question, but I do highly recommend going through it because I think it's really interesting. But I wanted to talk briefly about digital signatures, specifically RSA. So digital signatures are the asymmetric equivalent of max. And they are used when one person with the secret key wants to sign, and anyone else can verify, even without the secret key. Share the screen again. This again. So I'm going to go largely through the math of it. The general idea is that first it stands for Rivest, Shamir, Alderman, which is just the names of the inventor of the scheme. It actually works both as encryption and digital signature, but we're going to just use it for digital signature. So we start with something called Euler's theorem. We're not going to go nearly into as much depth as CSM does, but it basically says if we have a to the power of phi, we have as a function for now, of n, we say this is equivalent to 1 if you take it mod n. So we've got this n here and this n here. And this phi is something called a totient function. This is where we're going to start with. Down here, what we want to end up with is two numbers. If we take anything to the power of e, and then take it to the power of d, so m to the ed, we want to get back to the original message, again, mod n. So we need to get from there to that. In fact, I think we're going backwards here, but it's okay. So we know that if this, by the properties of what a modulo is, a mod is really just taking the remainder. So we can just say that a raised to the power of phi of n as many times as we want is still going to be 1. So we can say this is equivalent to 1 mod n. And we're going to, because we kind of want this m on both sides, we're actually just going to multiply both sides by a. So now we have a to the power of k phi of n plus 1, because we multiplied by a. This is equivalent to a mod n. So what we've done here is, okay, if we can find something such that this is satisfied. So if we can find some k, two values that are equal to k times 5n plus 1, then this will actually work. If we raise it to the power of 1, then raise it to the power of the other, we'll get back our original line. So how do we find these values? Well, if we're trying to find two EDs, E times D that multiplies to this is actually just something mod phi of n, because we are taking any multiple of 5n, and then the remainder is 1. So we're trying to find ED mod phi of n to be 1. And we can do this in any number of ways. Because we sort of have two free variables here, we're just going to choose some value of E. And the math is out of scope, but we can find some D that when you multiply them together are equivalent to 1 mod phi of n. Again, that's the Yosemite if you're really curious. But once we find this, these two numbers become our key. So this n that we've been using this entire time becomes a public key. Don't know why I'm in public, or why I'm in capital. So this is our public key. And then D becomes our private key. So whenever someone sends me a message, they raise it to the power of E, they send it to me, I raise it to the power of D, and I'm going to get back our original message. Because this is actually just some k times 5n plus 1. And then working backwards, if we subtract 1 from both sides in the exponent, then this is just equivalent to 1, and then that reduces to Euler's theorem. Again, this math is out of scope, but I think is really interesting. But what you really need to worry about is this is the E and N are the public key and D is the private key. Usually we fix the value of N, so we say, oh, N is defined in some standard somewhere. So actually we only need to know E as the public key, but that's really just an implementation detail. So when we want to encrypt something, again, we take M to the power of E, and we can't just take it to the power of E again, because that's not really helping us. So this is just encryption. And then when we receive it, we take that message to the power of D. Now, you'll see that there's this thing called pad. And that's because right now when we're encrypting, there's no randomness in it. So this padding function is kind of special. It's going to introduce randomness into our message in a way that is secure for RSA. Because RSA has a couple of special things that we need to worry about. One of them is, if the message is 1 and we raise it to the power of E, it's still just going to be 1. So it's not NCPA by itself. We need some scheme that pads the message in order to make it randomized and make sure it's, not 1. Again, it's kind of finicky. But to decrypt it, what we'll do is, now we know that this is pad of N. We're going to raise this to the power of D, so we get back our original pad of M. And this padding scheme is going to be reversible. So from here, we can get back to our M's. And to sign, it's basically going to be the same thing. Instead of padding, we're actually going to hash the message. And then we're going to raise, we'll take the hash of the message, we'll raise it to the power of D. And now we know that anyone who has our E, who is everyone, which is everyone, can raise this to the power of E and get back to the original hash. And now when they hash the message, they should see, oh, this is equal to the original message. And that was a lot, and I think most of it probably will take some time to digest. But does this make sense? How we encrypt and decrypt, and then how we hash in order to sign. Okay. We are super over time. I'm in 5 minutes, not that bad. But thank you everyone for coming. I'm sorry we didn't get to the last discussion sheet. But as always, there are recordings from the other, either recordings from the other discussion sections or a walkthrough video online, or both. So definitely go back and review those, and there are definitely solutions that you can read through at your end.